Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to look at this thing here. Now this is a 3.5-inch hard drive inside of a U-green external case, but I'm not really going to talk much about what's on the outside. Instead, we're going to talk about what you can find inside. Now this hard drive was sold by KinHank. Now KinHank is known as the makers of the Super Console X devices. And this one here they're calling the LaunchBox hard drive. And essentially, this is an all-in-one solution for Windows-based retro gaming. And they sell this in different storage formats. They have a 2.5-inch drive as well as a 3.5-inch drive. I'm going to use the 4TB one, but this goes all the way up to 12 terabytes. And essentially, this includes everything you need for retro gaming. All of the games, emulators, as well as the front end. It's going to allow you to play crazy games like this, Transformers, Gun Game, or whatever the heck this is. But the idea behind this is that you'll basically plug this into a computer and start playing. It even says that it comes with a license of LaunchBox, which includes BigBox, which is a TV-friendly user interface. And according to their splash page, this will support anything on Windows 7 and above, but they do recommend using an Intel Core i5 processor and a dedicated graphics card that's at least as powerful as the 1050 Ti. But yeah, that's really kind of it in a nutshell. The idea here is that you'll just take this hard drive, plug it into your computer, and immediately start playing retro games. But unfortunately, as you'll find later on this video, the experience is not quite like they advertise, and we'll go through all the things I like and I don't like about it, but I have to be honest, there's a lot more that I dislike about this whole product than the things I like about it. But either way, let's go ahead and take a deep dive into this and see what you'll get for your $127, and without any further delay, let's jump into it. Alright, let's do a quick unboxing. I have to say, the company contacted me ahead of time and said they wanted to send this out to me for review, and then I kind of forgot about it. And so when I open up this box and I'm like, why do I have a 3.5-inch hard drive? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. There's no labeling on here or anything else like that. And so that did throw me off for a bit, but as soon as I plugged it in, I figured out what it was. Either way, it's going to come with everything you need. It's going to have an AC adapter as well as a USB cable. And that's about it. For size comparison, here's the RG280V, as well as the NVIDIA Shield, and the AWOW PC stick. So this thing is quite a honker. Of course, there's a 2.5-inch drive option too. Looking at the hard drive in Disk Genius, you can see it's just one main partition, and of course it has 4 terabytes here. So let's look at what's in the file system itself. As you can see here, it's just a bunch of folders and files. And there's no instruction manual that comes with this device. You basically just have to read through the files that are loaded onto the hard drive. So let's open up this README file. So opening up the file here, you can see that it's basically just one image that somebody worked on. And I'm not sure if this was made by KinHank or if they borrowed it from somebody else, but there is a full kind of read through that explains the whole history behind it. One thing to note, that LaunchBox license they said that came with this hard drive? It looks to me like they just bought a single lifetime license and then loaded it up on all of these. And so even in the instructions, they encourage you to spend the $75 to buy your own LaunchBox license to give some money back to the developers. And while I agree, yes, the money should go to the LaunchBox developers, it's still pretty shady that they put it on here in the first place. Other than that, the README file is going to give you just a bunch of different tips, hitting select and start to exit a game, things like that. And so let's check out what else is inside this hard drive. And let's start with this one that says Setup User Guide and then for 64-bit systems. Now, if you open this up, you can see there's a bunch of different folders inside here that seem to have a bunch of different instructions inside. And essentially, this is what you have to do in order to play these games. You have to go through each of these folders and then do the instructions that are within them. And some of them have actual video files that'll tell you how to do certain things. But either way, this is far from a plug-and-play experience. And some of these things are very simple. So for example, this one is going to ask you to change the drive letter from whatever it happens to be to the letter M. So that's as easy as going into disk management and then changing the drive letter to M. And that makes sense. Maybe they have the emulators pre-configured to look in a specific drive letter, and so that'll help you out. Not a lot of people will assign the letter M to their drives, so that makes a lot of sense too. So yeah, assigning a drive letter, not a big deal, but you should look at some of the other things that they request you to do as well. For example, they're going to ask you to install all sorts of system files, things via batch files or Visual Basic files. And on top of that, they're going to ask you to disable your firewall as well as your antivirus software on your computer, and then do things like install a different version of DirectX. And to be honest, I'm not comfortable doing these things on my home computer to install these files from a hard drive from China that's connected to the computer that I would use for my everyday use. So while there's a couple things that I was comfortable doing, like assigning that drive letter, and also going through and making sure that BigBox and LaunchBox had the ability to run as an administrator, most of the other things I just was not comfortable setting up. And at the end of the day, that's not really something that I would recommend you do either. I mean, chances are your computer has all sorts of personal files and things on it, and I'm not sure that you should install all these files from an unofficial source on a computer that might have something personal on it. I'm just not comfortable with this. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to do the basic minimum stuff and then see what happens when we launch LaunchBox and see whether or not it actually works. And I'm going to go into this knowing full well that not every little thing might work because I didn't install everything, but all the same, we'll at least make a judgment of the experience itself. And we'll start with the regular LaunchBox first. We'll just open up the file here. And here's the first problem. Like it says there's a new update available and do you want to install it? And honestly, I'm not sure if you should or not. If you install an update, is it going to break everything? I don't know. So I'm just going to click no man, I don't want to do it. But as you can see, it starts with PS2 and loaded onto this hard drive, at least the 4TB one, there are over 400 PS2 games. And I've plugged in an Xbox controller here, which they recommend to use for this hard drive, and let's start up a game. So here we are with Black on the PS2, and it's working fine, it looks pretty good, but unfortunately the analog sticks are swapped. They are actually moving in the opposite direction of what I'm pushing. Same thing with X-Men Legends 2. This game looks great, even though it is stretched to 16:9, but all the same, at least it's working well. Unfortunately, the controls don't work either. And so you're probably going to have to go into each of these individual emulators and make these changes to the controls. And God of War, same thing, issues with the controls. It runs well. You know, I have a pretty powerful computer. It does have some of that weird ghosting effect that I often see with PCSX2, with God of War 2 in particular, but this is probably something you can adjust in the settings as well. Either way, it's not as plug and play as they had first advertised. But okay, yeah, I mean, the game catalog is pretty impressive. We have like over 600 GameCube games on here as well. I'm actually going to run through all of the game systems at the end of this video here, so just wait for that. I'll actually scroll through each of these so you can see how many games are on each of these systems. But that's a look at LaunchBox. Let's try the BigBox version. So we're just going to close out of LaunchBox and start up BigBox instead. Okay, and as you can see here, it's running some sort of intro video here. It looks pretty cool. And obviously this does not say the word KinHank on it. So my guess here is that KinHank just borrowed this image, put their name on it, and put it on AliExpress. Same thing here. It's asking us if we want to update the LaunchBox. I'm going to go ahead and say no again. So BigBox is kind of like your answer to Emulation Station. It's Windows based and it allows you to scroll through your various systems and then pick your game. You know how these kind of interfaces work if you've watched any of my other videos. And I'm a big fan of this stuff. I like navigating through my systems using a controller, and overall it seems to work pretty well. It's very flashy of a theme, you know, it looks pretty cool. But I will say it is a little bit sluggish as you're navigating through. You do have to pause quite a bit longer than I would expect in order to launch an actual game. And so it looks like they have about 10 Wii U games on here. Let's try some of these out. We'll start with Super Mario 3D World. And so the game seems to run fairly well. It's a little bit sluggish, but you might notice here there's quite a bit of screen tearing around the center of the screen here. Now I've played a lot of Wii U on my home computer here using the CMU emulator on my own, like the standalone emulator, and I've never seen screen tearing like this when I've used it myself. Even here with Smash Brothers on the Wii U, I'm having all sorts of pauses and tearing and things. And it might be caching shaders, I'm not really sure. It looks like they've turned off notifications in the emulator itself. But either way, I would find this to be downright unplayable. And this one also has screen tearing. It's hard to see just because the level itself is pretty stationary, but I definitely saw it when I was playing. And a lot of this is going to depend on the power of your computer, but my computer should be able to play Wii U pretty well, so I would say overall this is not a very good experience. Okay, let's check out the PlayStation catalog. We have about 850 PSP games, but there's only 3 PS4 games. And it turns out these 3 games are not actually PS4 games. Like, this thing can't emulate PS4. What they've actually done is just taken some PC games and labeled them as PS4 games because they're also on the PS4. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There are 2 games in the PS3 section, and that includes Castlevania Lord of Shadows 2 and FIFA Street 3. So if you're really into these games, and you have a computer that can run PS3 well, then you might have a good time. PlayStation 1 has almost 1,800 games, so quite a large catalog for PS1 games as well. So overall, if you're a PS1, PS2 fan, there's a good amount of content here. PS3, PS4, not so much. And it's not just Sony and Nintendo on this hard drive. For example, there's the TurboGrafx CD, which you see here. Let's boot this one up and just show you how long it takes to boot up a game from the BigBox interface. And as you can see here, it takes about 8 to 10 seconds to get through the loading screen and into the actual game system itself. And I don't think that's terrible. You know, it has to boot up RetroArch in the background, so not a huge deal, but it is a little bit slow. But the gameplay itself is fine. You know, as you can see here, they have these bezels around the sides here. It does look pretty cool. And so when it comes to retro gaming, yeah, they have a pretty nice catalog here. But of course, there are many ways to play retro games on a computer, and I don't know if this is probably the ideal way to do it. To be honest, I did get a little bit of input lag when I was playing, but overall, not a terrible experience, but there are definitely better ways to play retro games on a computer. I complained a little bit about how sluggish these screens are, but they are flashy and kind of nice looking. It's impressive to kind of jump through these games on BigBox, and it looks like they did a pretty good job making each of these themes. And most of these games are preloaded with bezels that are specific to that game, and those are pretty nice looking too. You can see here with Super Mario World, you have this nice Super Mario World bezel. Let's try out a couple other random systems. So here is the Atari Jaguar. It has something like 50 or 60 games altogether. We're going to try out Zool 2. This one boots up pretty quickly, and yeah, it is Zool 2. I've never played this game before, and it's funny when I try a game like this that I've never seen because I don't really know what to expect. Like, I can't tell which things are trying to kill me and which things I'm supposed to collect. Like, it's just kind of a weird game. And maybe people who grew up playing this game, they know exactly what to do. They know they're supposed to pick up the rubber duckies and the worms and the turkey legs to get points. I don't know any of that stuff. Okay, let's move on to PSP. So these boot up just fine, and like I said, there's about 850 of these games. But at first glance, this seems to be kind of a low resolution on my TV here. I would guess it's about 720p. And if we go into the settings, sure enough, it's at 3x PSP resolution, which is basically 720p. So at the very least, let's bump this up to 4x, which is 1080p. And yeah, this looks a lot better now. Now, obviously, performance on this system is going to depend on your computer, but I would say most computers can probably run 1080p PSP no problem. So really, it's not quite as plug and play as they make it out to be. You may have to get into the emulator settings to tweak the resolutions to match the computer performance that you have. Okay, let's try another system out here. Let's move on to Sega Saturn. This has nearly 300 games on here. I'm not sure if that's the full catalog, but man, that's a lot of Saturn games. There's stuff on here I've never even heard of before, like this one, Battle Monsters, and I think we have to try this one out. And I gotta admit, you know, I'm a big fan of fighting games from the 90s. These were the games that I really loved when I was a kid, but I've never heard of this, but it looks pretty awesome. It looks like a mixture of like Way of the Warrior from the 3DO, as well as Mortal Kombat and maybe a little bit of Pit Fighter going on there too. And this game's terrible. Like, it's just abysmal, but all the same, it's pretty cool to look at. I mean, either way, it's just kind of cool to see these Mortal Kombat rip-off games like this. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend actually enjoying this game. Okay, let's move on to Dreamcast. They have over 300 Dreamcast games on here, and as far as I could tell, this is a very close to complete catalog as well. And some of these games are games that I've had a really hard time playing on other systems, for example, Sega Rally 2. So let's boot this one up, and it turns out it actually does not load at all. It loads the BIOS splash page, but after that you just get a black screen. But for the most part, actually, a lot of the Dreamcast games played really well, and it looks like they're probably at a 720p and maybe a 1080p resolution. They look good. Same thing with the Dreamcast-related arcade games, things like Sega Naomi, they worked fine, as well as Atomic Wave. And so yeah, I can see the appeal here of having all of this content in one place. The ability to get to some of these systems is a little bit janky, and not every game's going to play, but overall, a lot of these systems are very close to being plug and play. There are some weird hiccups. For example, with Nintendo 64, it's definitely upscaling it at least to 720p, maybe even 1080p, I can't really tell here. But as you can see, the bezels on the sides are actually for Earthworm Jim 3 and not for WWF No Mercy. And that's a little bit weird looking, and there's nothing in the menu settings that I could tell that's going to turn off the bezels. And that may not be a big deal for this game, but when you try to play Game Boy Advance, the bezels are way too big. They're actually cropping a good portion of the screen here. And so that's going to get in the way of you actually being able to enjoy these games, and I think that's kind of a disservice to the game itself. Let's talk about some other problems I had with this system. For example, if I wanted to play Castlevania Rondo of Blood on the PC Engine CD, it boots into the BIOS screen, but it actually doesn't load the game itself, so that one doesn't work, which is unfortunate because that's one of my favorite games on the system. And it has what appears to be the full Daphne catalog, which is pretty exciting because some of these games are really hard to get working, for example Road Blaster, but unfortunately this one just completely fails on you when you try to start it up. And I'm sorry to report that it's not just that one game, it's basically every Daphne game doesn't actually load. Amiga is another good example. It has over 2,000 games in this catalog, but not a single one of them will actually boot. When you try to actually start up one of these games, it's going to say that the ROM file was not found. And maybe this has to do with all those files that I didn't install, but all the same, I'm not really willing to install those files just to play Amiga. Some other issues were like the Doom games wouldn't boot up, any of the Windows games just didn't seem to work properly. And while GameCube and Wii games did boot up okay, the problem is that just like with PS2, the controls are inverted. And essentially, this makes those games unplayable. So I thought, okay, let's actually get into the settings. This is kind of contrary to the whole plug and play thing, but let's see what I can do if I can actually boot up Dolphin itself and then adjust the control settings. But here's the weird thing. Even if I booted the Dolphin from the external hard drive, it would actually pull up the settings that I have on the standalone Dolphin already installed on my computer from a previous time. And so maybe there's some sort of conflict between these two, but it looks like if you already have some emulators installed on your computer, they're actually going to wreak havoc on this hard drive. And so you may have to actually wipe those in order to get them to work properly. And again, I think that's something you shouldn't have to do. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to launch BigBox here, and while this is launching, which does take quite a while, I'm going to just kind of explain what I think about this hard drive in general. And first thing out of the gate, this thing inherently is shady. I mean, they have a bunch of game content on here, and they're also selling it with a license that they're not authorized to be selling, and they're shipping it overseas over to you, and they expect you to put this on your Windows computer, and then also install a bunch of files in order to get it to work properly. And I think by now you've probably noticed that these are a lot of red flags. And maybe you're comfortable doing this. Maybe you've got some laptop that you really don't care about or anything like that. You've wiped all of your own personal files from it. Maybe this would be a good fit for that kind of dedicated laptop experience. But I'll tell you, I'm just not in a position to have a bunch of dedicated computers to put this hard drive on. This is just not something that I'm comfortable doing. And so yeah, there's a lot of red flags when it comes to operating this system. But that being said, there's a lot of content on here, and obviously there's a lot of shadiness involved with putting a bunch of game content on a hard drive and then selling it. But I'm not really here to pass judgment on all that. What I'm interested in showing here is the performance of these systems as well as the value of the overall package. And so yes, from a content perspective, there's a lot of content here, but all the same, I'm not really comfortable with the way that they have it packaged, especially when you compare that to the other offerings they have available in that same KinHank store. For example, they have several Super Console X devices that run EmuElec, and EmuElec is a much snappier system. It's a standalone partition on an SD card, which means that you don't have to compromise any files or install anything special. It's literally just a plug-and-play box, and it has content too. Now, of course, the EmuElec systems are not going to be as powerful. They're not going to be able to play things like PS2 or GameCube, but they also have on this store other systems that can play Batocera, and Batocera can easily play things like PS2 and GameCube. And much like with EmuElec, Batocera is its own standalone installation as well. You're not talking about running these things on your Windows computer. Instead, this is actually going to boot into its own operating system that is dedicated to gaming. And by virtue of not being part of the whole Windows process, it has a lower overhead, which means that the entire user experience is going to have just a more snappier feel to it. It's just an overall nicer experience. So, in the end, do I recommend this hard drive? It really depends on what you're looking for. If you're actually looking for something to plug into your Windows PC and just start gaming immediately, I do not recommend this hard drive, especially when you have things like EmuElec boxes or solutions that include things like Batocera. I think that those two operating systems are just a better match for all this stuff, and I'm not really comfortable recommending this device just based on all the things you have to do with it in order to get it working. Anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This one's a little bit different, but I thought you might enjoy it. Either way, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.